If you are serious about your business, if it's anything more than a hobby for you, you need to form a corporation, and it's almost always going to be an LLC is what you're going to want to form. That's going to help you avoid personal liability, and it's just going to be cleaner and make things simpler for you personally, but also give you that ability to sleep at night.
Get ready to build, protect, and sell your expertise online with the Online Genius Podcast. You'll laugh. We hope you won't cry. But you'll always be informed and prepared so you can have the success you want. Here's your host, Bobby Klink.
Hey there. Welcome to this week's episode of the Online Genius Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Klink, and I'm excited for today's episode. We're continuing our series where we're going to be diving in a little bit deeper into legal issues that affect you as an online entrepreneur. So not the typical episode where I'm interviewing someone and then giving a quick lesson, but instead a really deep dive into an issue and to give you a real mini training about issues. And this week, we're going to be talking about an issue that's kind of foundational to your business. And that is, how should you structure your business at the outset? So there's a couple of pieces to this. One is, should you form a corporation? Yes or no? And then if so, what kind of corporation? And then how do you run your business? So we're going to be talking about those core issues. And look, I know this isn't an issue that you might think is sexy or interesting. It's definitely not sales. It's definitely not marketing. But what I'm going to tell you is this decision is a very important decision that you need to make because it's going to affect a lot of the things that you do going forward, and then also could have some big implications for your personal finances, etc. So I want to dive into that, and we're going to go ahead and dive in now. But before I dive into kind of the core issues here, I just want to make it very clear. And you may not like hearing this if you haven't yet taken the time to set up a corporation or some kind of business entity. But the simple fact is, if you're serious about your business, if your business is something more than a hobby for you, there's just no way around it. You need to set up a business entity. And we're going to talk about in a second what kind that is. It's almost always going to be an LLC, a limited liability company, is going to be the best choice for an online entrepreneur. And we'll get to that in a second. But the fundamental concept and the fundamental thing that you need to take from this is that if you haven't yet formed a corporation, formed an LLC, or done something of that nature, you're making a mistake. If you're serious, you need to do that. And I want to start with the why, because I find that explaining why and the role and the importance of doing things will often break through and help people to make that decision. So there are a couple of different things you're going to hear about why you want to form a corporation, an LLC, or some other kind of corporation. And you'll generally kind of hear that people will talk about two different rationales, or three. One of them is the notion of limiting your personal liability for actions of the company. The second one, people will talk about tax benefits. And then other times people will talk about if you want co-owners, you're going to have to form some kind of ownership structure. So those are the rationales you're going to hear. And I want to talk about them briefly. What I'm going to tell you is, first, I want to dispel a myth. The tax benefit issue largely is not the reason to form any kind of business for a small entrepreneur. If you act as what's called a sole proprietor, which is what happens if you don't do anything, if you don't actually go through the process of creating a corporation, you're going to be taxed the same way as if you form an LLC for all intents and purposes. Now, there may be a couple of little fringe issues that you can do differently here and there, and I'm not a tax lawyer, so I'm not going to get into any of those details with you. But what I'll tell you is largely the tax benefits are non-existent until you get to the point of being more complicated if you have employees and things like that. There can be some tax advantages to different forms of corporations. But largely, the tax benefits aren't the reason why you're going to form some kind of business entity. The reasons why you're actually going to want to do it are to limit your personal liability and if you want to have co-owners. Those are the two fundamental reasons why you're going to need a corporate entity of some sort. So let's talk about the first one of limiting liability. Under the law, when you form a corporation, and just so you know, I'm using corporation broadly. It's any kind of entity that you create under the law. So it can be just what you think of as a standard corporation or an LLC, or in most states, there are things called limited liability partnerships or partnerships. There are all of these different types of entities, but I'm going to refer to those broadly as a corporation or a corporate entity, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Well, under the law, when you form one of those entities, that entity is considered a separate person from you under the law. So think of it as all of a sudden, before there was one person, well then when you form an entity of, Joe Blow LLC, all of a sudden the law says there's two. There's you and then there's your LLC. In my situation, when I first formed my law firm and it was Klink LLC, I went from just being Bobby Klink to then I had Bobby Klink and Klink LLC as two distinct entities under the law. And now I have a third one, Your Online Genius LLC. So now under the law, there are three different legal entities that are affected, me and each one of the LLCs. And the importance of that is that now when I sign a contract on behalf of my business, I'm not signing it personally as Bobby Klink. I'm signing it as the manager of one of my businesses. And what that means is that any liability, and here liability, what I'm talking about is if, for example, I couldn't perform on a contract. Let's say that, I couldn't pay a bill, or I had a lease and I couldn't pay the lease, and so I broke a lease for my company. Well, if I sign that on behalf of the company, not individually, then what happens is the only thing they can do is come after the company, generally. They're not going to be able to come after my personal assets on a debt, on a lease, or anything like that. So it kind of shields you from potentially having to pay a lot of money if, for example, God forbid, your business doesn't do well and it goes out of business, or if for some reason you can't perform on a single thing, a single contract or a lease or something like that, it gives you that protection. Now, what I do want to be very clear about is this is not a silver bullet that prevents you from ever being liable. That's a mistake that a lot of people make. Ironically, my father, who has a lot of businesses and he plays street lawyer all the time, he makes this mistake thinking that, if I put certain assets in an LLC, I'm never going to have any liability for that. And that's true to a point, but not at the end of the day. And here's the exception. You are always going to be liable for your own actions if you do something wrong. So in my case, even though I have a law firm that's an LLC, if I were to ever commit malpractice, to date I haven't, I've never been accused of it, et cetera. But if I were ever to fall down on the job and not perform and commit what's called legal malpractice, someone could always sue the LLC because the LLC is who they hired, but they could also sue Bobby Klink because I fell down personally in my obligations to them. So it's never an LLC will never protect you if you're a professional for professional advice you provide, or if you're driving a vehicle as part of your business and you get in a wreck personally, they could still sue you individually. They can always come after you for your own actions. If you set up an LLC, though, they can't come after you for leases, for contracts, for any kind of debts, or if you have contractors or if you have workers who make a mistake. So let me give you an example. Let's say you hire a contractor, a social media manager, and they make a mistake and infringe a copyright or multiple copyrights. Let's just say that they're horrible and make all kinds of mistakes on your behalf for your company. Well, you would be liable, your company would, for their mistakes. But you personally aren't because you didn't take that action. They did. If you have an LLC. Now, if you didn't have that, if you were just operating as your individual, you wouldn't get that protection. And someone could come after not only your company, but they could come after your own assets. If you have a house, if you have money, if you have all that stuff, they could come after it. So that's the big advantage. That's the real reason to do it. And it's a huge advantage to have. Again, we don't like to think about these bad things happening, but an LLC or other kind of corporate entity is a shield. It prevents those bad consequences in our business from spilling over into our personal finances and our personal lives. Now, the other reason you might want to set one up is if you want to have co-owners. If you are doing any kind of joint venture with someone else, where let's say you're sharing in the expenses and sharing in the profits, under the law, generally the law is going to recognize that as a partnership. And what that means is that it's just this amorphous partnership where, and here's the bad news, everything you have, can be subject to any liability of the partnership, including any actions of your partner. So if you have someone else who's out there as your partner and they make a mistake online, someone can come after you personally for their mistakes. So you got to do that. So you're going to want to form some kind of entity if you're going to have any co-owners. So in that case, you might go with a limited liability company, or you might go with a limited liability partnership, or even a limited partnership. There's various options there that you could go into, but that's a more complicated issue that isn't going to apply most times. Most times, the reason to form your corporation is to avoid liability. So that's the why. Now I want to dive into the different kinds of corporations and how do you figure out which one's right for you? Which kind of entity should you use to structure your business? And by and large, there are 4 different kind of business structures that you could think about. There's some variations on these, but largely there's 5 different forms. And I want to walk through them, kind of walk through the pros and cons. But what I'm going to tell you is, for an online entrepreneur, 95% of the time or 99% of the time, the proper form is going to be an LLC. But I want to inform you the different kinds so you know and you understand why you would generally want to make that decision. So here are the 5 kinds. You have a sole proprietorship, you have a partnership, you have what's called a C corporation, you have a limited liability company, and then you have an S corporation. So let's kind of walk through those in order. A sole proprietorship, that's what you have if you do nothing. If you don't form a corporation, if you just start doing business, you are a sole proprietor, and the law will treat you that way. You don't get any protection from liability. You don't get that. So you have all the exposure. So that is almost never the right answer. Now, I will tell people, if you're just testing something out as a hobby at the beginning, I can accept that. But as soon as you decide that you are serious about your business, that you actually are going to try to make a living doing this, or even going to supplement your income in a significant way, you need to move beyond this. And you need to move beyond this because you're going to want that liability protection, and because, I'm going to talk about this in a second, quite honestly, the cost and the difficulty of creating a corporation generally is pretty small. So a sole proprietorship will generally not be the right way to go. The next is a partnership, and this is what happens if you have co-owners. So if you have co-owners in a venture or business with you and you don't do anything, the law will create what's called a de facto partnership. That's going to say, hey, even though you didn't, write this down, you don't have an agreement, we're going to treat you as partners under the law. And this has all the drawbacks of a sole proprietorship, except that all of a sudden now you're not only liable for your actions, but for all of the actions of your partner as well. So it's even worse. So that's not going to be the right choice. With a partnership, if you have multiple owners, there's, an opportunity we're going to talk about. I didn't mention it in the list, but you also have some other options. There's something called a limited partnership, where basically think of it as you have somebody who is the money will come in normally is how it works. They just put money in, but they don't have any decision-making authority, so they also can't be held liable. They are a limited partner, and then you'll have a general partner who makes all the decisions and is the person who's liable. So that's one way to go. Or you could go with a limited liability partnership, which, just so you understand it, I'm going to talk about an LLC in a second. You could do a partnership or an LLC in most states in the same way. So the next thing I mentioned is a C corporation. Well, a C corporation, this is what you think of when you think of the big companies in the world. So the GEs of the world, the Coca-Colas of the world, they are almost all C corporations. What this means is, they'll have shareholders who are the owners. Then they're going to have an executive team who are the day-to-day decision makers normally. And then they're going to have a board of directors who theoretically are the ones who have to approve certain important decisions, and then also will be the types of people who would decide it's time to fire this executive team or make big strategic decisions. So you kind of have those 3 different groups. These can be kind of onerous to set up because you have to have bylaws. You have to have a lot of different pieces to set up a C corporation. And then you actually have to kind of comply with all of these. Think of it as kind of the different technicalities of operating one of these business to keep the protection. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't want to have to deal with a lot of technicalities in my business. So that's a big problem. The separate problem with a C corporation is that a C corporation gets taxed. So there are actually tax disadvantages to having a C corporation. A C corporation, you as the corporation have to file a tax return and pay taxes as a corporation on your profits. Then when you disperse those profits to the owners, they then have to pay taxes on those dividend payments or those disbursements as well. So you have a real double taxation problem. Now, you can pay yourself a salary as one of the managers and employees of a corporation, which you just pay your personal taxes on before the C corporation has to pay taxes on it. But any surplus, any income above that at the end of the year is going to be taxed. So that's one of the big disadvantages of it. There are some advantages for a C corporation when you get further down the line if you have a lot of employee benefit plans and things like that. But again, for most online entrepreneurs, that's not a consideration. For most online entrepreneurs, a C corporation just isn't going to be a good fit because of all of these issues, the double taxation, the fact that you have to meet all of these formalities, etc. So generally, the C corporation is not going to be right. So that brings us basically to the last two. And first, we're going to talk about a limited liability company or an LLC. This is generally going to be the form of the corporation you're going to create at your state level. What a limited liability company is it's a more streamlined version of a corporation. The good thing is for tax purposes, it's taxed pretty much just like a sole proprietorship. So the LLC is not going to pay taxes. If you form just a basic LLC, it doesn't even file tax returns. It does nothing in the taxing front. It just kind of passes through all of the income, all of the expenses to you as an individual. So you get that tax advantage of avoiding the double taxation. And under the recent tax reform bill, you're going to get to write off 20% of the income from that, including what you pay yourself and all those things before you have to pay taxes on it. So that's another advantage of an LLC. Again, a sole proprietorship, you're going to get that same treatment. But so you have all of that. Generally, a limited liability company, in most cases, you're going to have what's called a member managed LLC. That means the people who own it and the people who manage it are one and the same. If you're just a sole owner, it's generally going to be a single member, single manager LLC. So in other words, you're the only owner and you're the only manager. So you have all authority. You have this. You have an operating agreement which sets all that out, but it's a pretty straightforward document. And then you just run your business how you want. There aren't a lot of formalities. There aren't a lot of difficulties. When you want to pay yourself, you don't pay yourself through a payroll processor. You just write a check from your business to you as what's called a disbursement. And then you personally pay the taxes on that. So it's simplified in every way, and it gives you the liability protection. So it gives you all of the good things of a corporation without putting a lot of burden on you as the owner, as the person operating it. So that's why I say it's generally the right choice. Now, there is another choice you can make, and this is the S corporation. Now, S corporation, treating it as a different type of entity is kind of a misnomer, because realistically, an S corporation isn't something you do when you form your corporation at your state level. It has to do with what you do at the federal level with the IRS in the taxation process. So what an S corporation does is it gives you kind of the best of both worlds. You can have an LLC and then make what's called the S Corp election. What that means in reality, for an S Corp, you have to pay people who are working in the business a reasonable salary, even if they're an owner. And you do that through payroll. So, for example, my law firm is set up as an S corporation. So the money comes in the door and I pay myself a salary, and I use QuickBooks. And they're the ones who process my payroll. When I was working with a bunch of employees, they process all theirs and then process mine just the same as any other employee. Pay the taxes as you're paying it. You pay it to the IRS, et cetera. You all of those steps just like you're an employee. And you have to pay yourself a reasonable salary. That's part of the rules. What that means is up in the air. And then you can have an income above that. And the advantage of doing an S corporation and what you get for having to do that payroll is this. For your income that's above your reasonable salary, you're generally not going to have to pay what are called the self-employment tax. So if you're not aware, that's the Medicare, the Social Security, all of that. And I forget the exact percentage it is now, but I think it's now up to maybe 14% that you have to pay on your income. So if you just have a normal LLC, and at the end of the year, you do your books and you made $100,000. Well, you pay your federal income tax on that $100,000. You pay your state income tax if you have that on that. Plus, you pay this self-employment tax on the entire $100,000. Well, an S Corp, let's say you paid yourself a salary of $72,000 during the year. You're going to pay all those same taxes on that $72,000, and you're going to pay it throughout the year. Then you're going to have that $28,000 left over. You're still going to pay federal income tax. You're still going to pay state income tax. You're not, however, going to have to pay self-employment tax, that 13 or 14%. I forget the exact amount on that $28,000. Now, again, I want to make clear, I'm not a tax lawyer. I work with a CPA, and you should do the same, especially if you're thinking about an S Corp. The decision about going with an LLC versus an S Corp is purely a tax issue. It's kind of what's the tax versus what's the burden. There are also some requirements for an S Corp that have to do with citizenship. You can only have so many owners and things like that. If you're a United States citizen and you're the only owner of your LLC, it's not going to be an issue. But you should talk with your CPA about that to figure out, hey, which one works and which one should I do? So that's the 5 different kinds. And so again, what I'm going to tell you is 95% of the time, the right decision is going to be when you form something at the state, you're going to form an LLC, because that's almost always going to be the right decision. And then when you decide how you're going to be taxed, whether as a standard LLC or as an S corporation, you're going to want to talk to your tax professional, a CPA who does these kinds of things and helps people make these decisions. And then once you make that decision, you just make the election, and it's that simple. So those are really the choices. If you're asking me for guidance, I'm going to tell you it's an LLC, and you may or may not go with the S Corp formulation. Now that we've got that out of the way, the next issue that we need to turn to, so this is kind of the next big decision you have to make is, okay, fine, let's talk about setting it up. Where do we do it? How do we do it? And all of these 2 things. Now, first of all, there's a lot of these things where you're going to hear people say, oh, you should form your LLC in Nevada, or you should form it in this state or that state. And they have all these rationales, and I've never quite understood what they are. They'll often say there are tax benefits, etc. But what I'm going to tell you is none of that's actually right on a tax basis for the most part. So if you're the owner of an LLC, so I'm in Washington, D.C., if I'd form my LLCs in Nevada, I still have to pay taxes. I still have to pay my D.C. income tax on all of my income coming from that LLC, meaning what I'm paid in salary, but also any income at the end of the year. I'm still liable. So I'm not going to save any money on taxes by forming my LLC in Nevada. Now, there can be some minor advantages of certain states when you get more complicated. Classic example of this, and this isn't really LLC so much, but Delaware is a state that has a ton of corporations formed there. And part of the reason is they have made a point of trying to do that. And they have a ton of decisions by courts that kind of lay out all the obligations and all of these things. So there's a clear set of rules. None of that matters if you're a solopreneur or if you have a small business, because none of that stuff comes into play. So my general guidance to people and what I tell people, if someone hires me, I'm pretty much always going to give them this piece of advice. Form your LLC in your home state. And let me tell you why. Because it's number one, it's simple. It's going to save you money in most cases. And really, normally there's no downside. And let me walk through this. Okay, so if you were to form an LLC in another state, here's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to form your LLC in that other state and then hire someone to be what's called a registered agent in that state. You have to have someone with a physical presence in the state so that if someone sues the company, they can be what's called served with the paperwork. Basically, the lawsuit can be delivered to them. Now, you're normally not going to have an individual. You're going to hire some company to do that, to serve as your agent, and you're going to pay them money every single year to do it. Then you're going to have to register your foreign entity in your home state so that you're allowed to do business in your state under that company. So that's why it's more complicated. You're going to have to file now in 2 different states, not just one. You're going to have to maintain a registered agent in that foreign state. So that's going to cost you money. Plus the 2 filings is going to cost you money. So you have all of this complexity and more money. And what do you get at it? Really nothing. Let's talk about the other side. If you form in your home state, what do you do? Well, for me, I am my own registered agent for my companies. So if anyone sues one of my companies, they will be told, deliver to Robert Klink. I mean, it's that simple. So I don't have to hire a registered agent. I don't have to file multiple places. I just have to file my paperwork in DC, and that's it. And so that's why it's generally going to be beneficial to just go ahead and form it in your own state. Now, There may be some more complicated situations where it might make sense to go elsewhere. Again, you should talk with a local lawyer, especially if you're thinking about doing that and that you think your situation more complicated. But a typical case, you're going to just form the LLC where you are. So now let's talk about how you do that. So most states are going to do this online. Most states, it's a pretty simple process to form an LLC. Like in DC, I think you have to answer like 8 questions, including the name of the company, the address, the name and address of what's called the registered agent. So that's me, and then a couple of other things. But it's very simple. I mean, it takes something like 10 minutes to set up an LLC here in Washington, D.C. It's a very simple process, most states. Now, some states for an LLC, there are additional requirements. Some states, I think New York, for example, has what's called a publication requirement. So you have to publish that you are forming an LLC. So you need to kind of do some research where you are if you're setting up your LLC. Make sure you're meeting all the requirements, etc. But generally, it's going to be a pretty simple process. Generally, you can do it yourself, especially if you're in a state that doesn't require publication or anything like that. Or, if you want to pay someone to do it, a company like LegalZoom will actually do all the filings for you and take care of all that. So you can do that relatively cheaply. But again, in most states, unless there's some weird requirement, you can do it yourself and save the money, because you can answer the questions. It's not that complicated. So again, you're going to usually go onto their website, and normally you're going to be looking for the Secretary of State's office, but you can just look for whatever your state and then corporate filings or corporate entities in Google, and you're going to find the answer of where to go. So you'll do that. You file. Normally, you can go ahead and file pretty quickly, and it'll depend on what it is, where you are, what state you are, how long it takes. You can pay for expedited, but it's not that bad. And normally, you don't have to file anything other than answering these basic questions for an LLC, and that's part of the advantages of it. And the cost in DC, I think the current price is $220 to file. And that's it. So that's all I have to pay. If you form it yourself, you pay $220 and you have an LLC. And then every couple of years, I have to file a report, which I say file a report. It's basically you have to pay another fee, and you'll have to do that. Now, I'm going to tell you, other states are more expensive. If you're in California, you're going to pay a lot of money. I think it's $800 or $900. But most states are going to be in the range of $200 to $400 to $500 to form your LLC. And that's it. And then you're done. You've got it formed. So that's the process of going and creating your company. But once you've done that, you're not there. You're not done yet. Then you have to go to the IRS. That's when you're going to get your EIN number, your employee ID number, which hopefully you already have if you're doing business, because you should have one of those anyway. But that's how you basically think of that as kind of like your social security number for your business in the IRS's mind. That's the formal number that identifies your business. So you're going to need that for tax purposes, et cetera. So you'll get that with your company name, et cetera, and do all that so that the IRS recognizes it. And before you do that step, though, you should talk to your accountant to figure out, do you want to do the S-Corp election? Because if you form your company and make that S-Corp election right away, you can do that anytime. If you don't, so if you formed your company, then went and got an EIN number and then waited, you can only kind of make that S-Corp election at certain times during the year. So you'll want to know whether you want to do that from a taxing perspective before you go to the IRS's website. And again, talk to a CPA to figure that out. But so that's the process. You do that, and then once you've got your EIN number, that's normally when you go to a bank and open your bank account and show them, hey, here's the company, here's this tax number for any interest, et cetera, that they're going to need all of that to do that. So at that point, you have your business set up. Then the final piece we need to talk about here in this mini training is, okay, what do you do once the business is set up? Because the last thing you want to do is go through all the trouble of setting up a business, doing all that right, and then not running it right. And as a result, you could then lose your protection, because you have to run your LLC the right way or you will not have protection. So what does that mean? So for an LLC or whatever entity you have, you're going to need what's called something called an operating agreement, or if it's a partnership, it's a partnership agreement. But the point is that an agreement that sets out how will the business be run and managed. The reason you want to do that is so that there's clear protocols and policies and processes, et cetera. Now, it doesn't have to be complicated. My LLC operating agreements largely say that I, as the managing member, have authority to do anything and everything. And I don't have to get any authority from anyone. I mean, I don't know who I would go to get authority as the sole owner. But it's pretty simple and gives me that power. But the point is that you need to set that up just so there's no question. Some banks will actually want to see a copy of that when you're opening the account to make sure that you have the right to sign checks, etc., on behalf of the company. So you'll want to get an LLC operating agreement in place. The next thing you have to do, I think, is if there's anything in that operating agreement that says you are going to do certain things, you need to do it. So, for example, if you have an operating agreement that says you will have meetings once a year, well, you better have that meeting once a year. Again, normally in an LLC operating agreement, you're not going to have that. But if it says that, the only people who are authorized to spend money on behalf of the company are X, Y, and Z, well, those should be the only people who have access to the money. So you just need to do all of those things in accordance with your operating agreement. Again, if you're a single member LLC, it's generally not a complicated thing, and operating consistent with your agreement is not going to be difficult either. Now, the next piece is you need to keep your money separate from your personal money, and your business money need to be kept separate. This is the big piece. This is the big thing you need to do when you are running your business to keep the protection you want. And so let's talk about what this means. Well, it means you got to have your own bank account for your personal stuff and then a bank account for your business stuff. Basically, this is the way it works. Under the law, if you are not treating your business as a different entity, the law won't either. So it's not going to give you any of that great protection we talked about, which is the reason to create the company in the first place. And so this is, a big piece of that. And showing that you keep your money separate is a big thing. If you don't do it, no court will probably recognize the company and give you that protection. If you keep it separate, you can have that protection. So keep your bank account and keep your business bank account. Don't treat them as the same. When you're going to pay yourself, write a check from the business bank account to your name or run it through a payroll company if you're doing that. But do it that way so there is a paper trail. So when I had my law firm at first, it was not an S corporation. I would just pay myself through what are called disbursements. I would write a check. To me, it would say a disbursement. In my accounting software, it would show it as a disbursement of profits to a shareholder. And it was just done, or not as a shareholder, but as a member, and it would be done that way. So there was no question you had that paper trail. I wasn't, for example, writing checks for personal expenses out of my business account. That's not how you do it. No, you write the checks and pay for your personal bills out of your personal accounts, and you write a check for salary, disbursement, whatever, from the business account to your personal account. Now, a little tip I'm going to tell you. Again, talk to your CPA because there may be certain things that you think of as personal expenses that could be paid for by the business. You'll want to talk to an accountant you trust, a CPA you trust who can give you these things. For example, if you run your business with your cell phone and that's your only phone, could you maybe pay your cell phone bill out of the business? Or what if you have a home office and that's it, and you have high-speed internet at home so you can run your home office? Can you pay part or all of that out of your home office or out of your business account, et cetera? So think about those kind of things. Talk to a CPA and they can kind of do that and maybe help you save on some taxes that way. But again, I cannot give you any kind of guidance there. You're definitely going to have to talk to your CPA about something like that. But the point is that whatever you determine is a business expense is paid out of the business account. Whatever's not a business expense is paid out of your personal account. So you've got to keep it separate. Now, when I say this, a lot of people freak out. And I'm not saying you can never pay a business expense personally. This is the one exception. You could pay a business expense personally and then get it reimbursed by the business. There might be different reasons you want to do that. For example, I have a personal credit card that gets me miles but also gets me special benefits on certain airlines. So I book my airline tickets with that credit card and then I do a reimbursement. And when I do that, I do an expense report. So again, the important point here is have a process, have a procedure where you have documentation that you can then, if the IRS comes one day and says, well, what is this expense? You can say, this is to pay this business expense. Here's my reimbursement form to show what it was. So that's okay. You can do that. The problem is when you go the other way. The big problem is when you're paying personal bills, personal expenses out of your business account, or if you just have one account. And so that's going to be a problem. That's where you get into trouble. So you need to keep them separate if you want to have any chance. Now then, the next thing is get your contracts in the name of the company. So for example, if you hire a copywriter to write some copy for you, don't have it, in my case, don't have the copywriter write the contract for Bobby Klink. No, the party to the contract is your online genius, and I'm signing on behalf of your online genius. If you have a lease, if you get a space, whether it's a virtual space or something else, sign on behalf of the company. Have the contract in the company's name. My lease has always been in my law firm name, and my law firm is the party to that lease. Again, if I'd signed it personally, then all of a sudden, if I, for example, couldn't fulfill that lease, I'm liable personally. Because my law firm did it, my law firm is the party that would be liable, not me personally. So you just need to get in the habit of doing that. Get all contracts that are on behalf of the business in the name of the company, the LLC you form. Then the final thing is going to be to track expenses that may be shared expenses, and you need to bring these to your CPA's attention. So other than things like your cable bill and things like that, one thing you need to think about, if you have a home office and that's where you do business and it's dedicated, you should definitely talk to your CPA about how to structure things. So for example, I now have a home office which is used exclusively for my business. And so my CPA has given me advice on what can I do for that? Can I maybe deduct part of my mortgage bill at the end of the year as a business expense? So you can talk to your CPA about these things and figure all of these things out. There's all these different rules, but any place where you have something like that, where you have something that's shared between your individual use and your business use, you want to talk to your CPA and see if there are ways that you could get tax advantages by doing it a certain way. So they may tell you, for example, you have to use it only for this. Or if you have a vehicle, what they're going to tell you, for example, is you're going to have to track your miles. I think. I'm not sure. I've never had a business where I really had travel in that capacity. But they will be able to tell you what you need to do to be able to get the maximum tax advantages for your business and your personal returns. So you're definitely going to want to do that to get the protection you need. So that's the last piece. Run your business the right way and you'll be protected. So that's kind of the end of this mini training. I want to kind of go back and do a quick recap. The first point that you need to take away: if you are serious about your business, if it's anything more than a hobby for you, you need to form a corporation, and it's almost always going to be an LLC is what you're going to want to form. That's going to help you avoid personal liability, and it's just going to be cleaner and make things simpler for you personally, but also give you that ability to sleep at night. Again, I said normally in almost every case for an online entrepreneur, the proper business form is going to be an LLC, but you might want to make what's called the S Corp election for tax reasons. You need to talk to your CPA to get the answer to that. Once you decide on what form you want, it's a pretty simple process to create your company. You're going to look for normally the Secretary of State's office in your state, normally done online. And it's normally a process that's pretty simple. You're going to answer maybe 8 or 10 questions online and boom, you're done. Your corporation is formed. But I'm going to give you the proviso. You need to make sure, just do some research on your state's requirements. Make sure there's no other rule or anything else you have to do. Again, most Secretaries of State's offices will have publications to help you understand that. Then once it's set up, you're going to go to the IRS, get your EIN or employee or employer ID number so that you have basically a social security number for your business. You're going to set up your business bank account. You're going to do all of those nice little things. And then you're going to run your business as a separate entity. And if you do that, you're going to keep all of the liability protections that you love to have and not have a lot of hassles. So that's it for today. That's this mini training. Now, if you enjoyed this training and if you'd like to learn more, I am starting a new weekly training that you can join. It's a live masterclass called Legal Made Simple. The point of it is I walk through kind of the key areas, a lot of the areas that I'm covering in these podcast episodes, and I give some really specific, guidance on these different areas that you need to handle, help you understand the different agreements you've got to have in place, legal concepts you need to understand, etc. You can grab that and get a seat at my weekly training by going to youronlinegenius.com/webinar. Again, youronlinegenius.com/webinar. That'll take you to the sign up page. You can grab your seat, and then you can attend and learn more. So you'll get more than just the corporate entities. It's basically a bunch of different areas, and I walk through these different areas so that you have an understanding of what you need to do to protect your business writ large. So I hope you'll join me on that. Until next week, this is Bobby Klink, and I will talk to you later.
Thanks for listening, and remember to visit mistakes.youronlinegenius.com to get your essential guide to the 4 legal mistakes that can doom your business and how to avoid them. Join us next week for another episode to expand your online genius and your success.